says one incredibly small genetic mutation in one of more than 3 billion component parts, or letters, of the human genome is largely responsible for people having white skin instead of brown skin. Scientists think the mutation may have formed tens of thousands of years ago as early humans who all had dark skin were making their initial migration north out of Africa and into Europe. Dr. Keith Chang, lead author of the study, hopes it will reduce discrimination based on complexion.
What's very striking about what we found is that this issue that is so charged is due to a change in one letter of our instruction book of life. Out of 3 billion, it's one.
I'm a geneticist, and I study how mutations occur, which is how cancer occurs, and I use pigmentation to detect those mutations. By chance, the light skin-colored fish that I used for that research also taught us a lot about how Europeans, how humans became lighter skinned.
What Professor Chang discovered was perhaps one of the most important genetic mutations ever found. A single change among literally billions of coded instructions within zebrafish DNA that reduced black pigment from their stripes. Soon after, this identical genetic mutation was found in fair-skinned Europeans.
In the light-skinned zebrafish, we're all diminished, and the same thing happened in humans. When I opened the textbook and saw that same thing, I began to sweat. Not only did light-skinned people evolve from black-skinned people, but lighter-skinned people, whether they're European or whether they're Asian, like me, were actually mutants of the dark-skinned people.
This was remarkable because we had only inferred on the basis of circumstantial evidence that this must have occurred in evolution, but we didn't have any concrete genetic evidence. Now we do.
June took DNA from over 160 ethnic groups around East Asia. Over 12,000 samples. And so, what did you find?
We did not see even one single individual that could be considered as the descendant of the Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant of our ancestors from Africa.
The result couldn't have been any clearer. The result couldn't have been any clearer.
Here, blue eyes or green eyes or gray eyes. Where do we find these traits at? We find them in white people. But here is the kicker. Albinism, oculocutaneous 2, oculocutaneous 1 is found in every single race of people on the face of the earth. That is the kicker. Why is that the kicker? Because we can trace it all the way back to African people. So this is proof positive that this is the source. So if you are not Bahadi tribe in Pakistan, have you ever seen an albino Pakistani? Here you go. Look at the hair. You have red hair. You have blonde hair. These people are everywhere. This is albinism. This is where this white race comes from. But we're going to go into it further. If you ain't convinced yet, you will be. So now,
trying to genetically alter the species.
Them as in reptilians.
Therefore, when maybe just out of random mutation, something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in. Right. And it may well be that the paler-skinned nation, people on the earth, have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. And in fact, Professor Steve Jones...
And now, we about to look...
The Africans who came out from Africa have no evidence of any Neanderthal genes in them.
Dang, nigga!
No evidence of admixture.
Dang, nigga!
So they're the real pure humans.
Skull of a modern human, and this is from a Neanderthal. Look closely and you can see that this one has a slightly longer brain case. Most scientists believe that these are two separate species and there wasn't much interaction between the two. But now we know there was interbreeding and that all non-Africans living today are part Neanderthal. The researchers extracted DNA from Neanderthal fossils and compared it with that taken from people living today. They found that the DNA of Europeans and Asians is 2% Neanderthal.
It's a very exciting discovery because it gives us really the first strong evidence that there was interbreeding with people like the Neanderthals. And it means that modern humans in different parts of the world may have slightly different mixes of modernity and these more primitive genes.
Further analysis should give a greater insight into how Neanderthals lived and shed more light on our...
Scientists believe they've picked up the trail of that hairy historic reject in the most surprising of places.
In us, many of us anyway, there is new evidence that humans inherited up to 4% of our DNA from Neanderthals.
The study in the journal Science is based on painstaking research into 3 Neanderthal bone fragments. Scientists reconstructed the Neanderthal genetic code and compared it to modern humans from across the globe and found there was up to a 4% match with humans everywhere but from Africa. The theory is that our human ancestors migrating out of Africa some 70,000 years ago had some amorous encounters with Neanderthals somewhere in the Middle East.
We mean that they interbred or they had sex.
This is the first real evidence Neanderthals and humans had kids, which means, despite the old assumption that Neanderthals disappeared from the evolutionary chart...
You're called white or you're non-white. That's on the census. That's the classification. You see, that is the problem. The word white, when it refers to human beings, means genetic deficiency, mutation, genetic deficiency, inability to produce melanin pigment. It means tiny minority on the planet. You see, there's no way around it. It's like an elephant being in a room. And everybody is walking around squeezed up against the wall. But they're not talking about the elephant because they are afraid to talk about the elephant.
You know, having light skin in a world of dark-skinned people doesn't seem to be that advantageous. I'm wondering how those early Caucasians survived and went on to thrive.
Well, in fact, you needed to have dark skin in Africa to survive in very light, bright sunlight. But when you move further north into Scandinavia, for example, there's not much sun, and you must have that sunlight to produce vitamin D, or you're going to get rickets and die.
Interesting. And then in terms of Asian and Latino skin colors, were those mutations as well, do you think, or was that breeding? And
yes, well, so independent changes occurred in the Asians. We don't know what those changes are yet, but that'll be interesting to find out.
Okay. Well, it really is a fascinating science, and I know there were a couple of eureka moments for you when you made these discoveries, and we'll be discussing this, I'm sure, from here on out. We appreciate your time, Dr. Chang.
You're very welcome. Thanks.
Had dark to black skin. Cheddar Man DNA analysis reveals the fossil, known as Cheddar Man, was unearthed more than a century ago in Gobbs Cave in Somerset. Intense speculation has built up around Cheddar Man's origins and appearance because he lived shortly after the first settlers crossed from continental Europe to Britain at the end of the last ice age. People of white British ancestry alive today are descendants of this population.
For a long time about equality, to be equal. White people can't be equal to black people because they can't produce melanin pigment. And that's the basis upon which they operate. You see, so again, you know, platitudes and all of that's good, but it doesn't have anything to do with the reality, the specific reality that has caused a problem for people for 500 years plus.
Well, if you make the assumption that the human race arose like around the equator and that skin color, dark skin color would be the phenotype, then are you assuming that as people moved outward, there was a mutation, and if you were in the north, it allowed that mutation to live, which is how we got white people?
Yes.
Would that follow?
Yeah. If Nina Jablonski, who spoke in another one of your things, explained this, and she played a role in studying the reason for dark skin, which is if you have lots of intense sunlight, it destroys folic acid, And it turns out folic acid is really important for babies to develop properly, so it's not too good for a population for the babies to not develop properly. So that's why dark skin. Now, as you move north, there's another essential vitamin called vitamin D. There's an intermediate, biochemical intermediate, that needs to be then converted by the liver, but that intermediate's formed by UV light going through the skin. If you're near the equator and you have a dark skin, it still gets through enough to get your vitamin D. But now if you go north and it's cold and you wrap up and it's less sun because the sun's coming at an angle now, you will get rickets and have other problems supposedly. So that's thought to be the reason for selection for lighter skin.
You elaborate as to why specifically black guys?
Yes, black guys are melanated and I want my children to survive and I know that the only way for them to survive in the future is for them to have melanin in their skin. So that's the way for me to, make my legacy continue.